yung nagkakaroon ng reactions, right? So the concentrations of these two would definitely affect the enzymatic reaction. Diba? The substrate concentration and the enzyme concentration. So yun yung first two natin. Factors that could affect enzymatic reaction. So we have first here the substrate concentration. So again, sino po si substrate? It is a molecule wherein a particular enzyme catalyzes its reaction or catalyzes reaction, right? So we have here substrate concentration. So in 1913, Michaelis and Mentin hypothesized the role of the substrate in the ES complex formation. So according sa hypothesis, the substrate, wait lang, nag-next tayo. The substrate here readily binds to free enzymes at low substrate concentration. Okay, at low substrate concentration. So you can see here, you have here the substrate concentration, ayan yan, increasing, and you have here the initial reaction rate. Ay, tagilid tong aking tab. The initial reaction rate and the maximum velocity. So ayan. So according to the hypothesis, the substrate readily binds to free enzyme at low substrate concentration. So you can see here the enzymes at kita nyo yung active site, right? Yung nakaunga dyan. That is your active site. So yung ating cavity dyan. So yung opening, kumbaga dyan. So the reaction rate steadily increases when more substrate is added. So here, on the first part here, enzymes are greater than the substrate, right? So kung may substrate man na present, they will readily bind here to your enzyme. Yung orange yung enzyme natin, right? So as you increase your substrate, mas madami yung magbabind na dito, right? So the reaction steadily increases when more substrate is added. So dito, mas madami muna yung ating enzyme, right? So magbabind yung substrate natin. And that is called as your first order kinetic. And then the reaction here increase as you add the substrate. Kasi magkakaroon lang naman ng reaction kapag magkasama sila, no? So if walang substrate na na-add, walang reaction na mangyayari. There will be no reaction that will happen. So here, reaction will definitely increase because you will be adding substrates here to combine with your enzyme. So that is your first order kinetics. And the reaction rate is directly proportional to the substrate concentration. So the more substrate that you will be adding, tumataas yung reaction rate natin. Ayan o, so tataas din yung reaction natin. So from here, tumaas na siya dito, yung reaction rate natin. Right? So, eventually, yung substrate concentration natin, sige, add ka ng add, magiging high enough na yun to saturate all the available enzyme. So, mangyayari, wala nang substrate na ibabind sa enzyme because the enzymes are no longer available, kumbaga, no. The velocity or the reaction velocity has already reached its maximum. So, ibig sabihin na combine na, no, dito. So, that is now called as your saturation kinetics. So, the substrate concentration reached its maximal value. And as you go along here, you will see na meron na tayong excess in the substrate. Right? So, high enough na sila to saturate all the available enzyme. So, nasa maximum na. So, may products na tayo, no? The resultant free enzyme immediately combines with the excess free substrate. So, after the reaction is formed, we have now here resultant na free enzyme. So, meron tayong mga resultant free enzyme and then they will what now? Combine with the excess free substrate. So the reaction is now called your zero order kinetics. So dito naman, depende yan sa enzyme na available, no, sa concentration, kasi meron tayong resultant, when the product is formed, there is a resultant free enzyme. So dito naman sila magbabind sa mga excess na substrate natin. So the reaction in the zero order, the reaction is in the zero order kinetics. And this depends on the enzyme concentration. Okay? So you have here the first order, the saturation, and the zero order kinetics. Next now is the enzyme concentration. So yes, it could be a factor that can affect the enzymatic reaction. So the higher the enzyme concentration, the faster is the reaction. Tama? Because more enzyme is present to bind with the substrate. More enzyme is present to bind with the substrate. Okay? So next now, we have your cofactors. Cofactors are non-protein entities that must bind to particular enzymes before a reaction occurs. So itong ating cofactors, kumbaga sila yung ating helper, no? Helper para magkaroon ng reaction. And we have here different examples of cofactors. You have your coenzymes, your activators, and your metalloenzymes. Coenzymes, activators, and your metalloenzymes. So coenzymes are organic cofactors. Okay? Or they are organic compounds. And yung coenzymes po natin, they serve as a second substrate. So you already know what a substrate is, right? So nagsiserve po siya as second substrate at didikit siya doon sa ating inactive na enzyme. So for example, you have here your APO enzyme. Your APO enzyme here is an inactive, no, enzyme natin. And you have here the coenzyme. So didikit yung coenzyme natin. Coenzyme is a cofactor, ha? Coenzyme is an organic cofactor doon sa ating APO enzyme. So didikit siya sa ating, it will bind to your APO enzyme, and this will serve as the activator. So after binding, you will now have here the holo enzyme, and this is now the active enzyme. And dito po sa coenzyme, magbabind yung ating substrate. Okay? And your coenzyme here is essential to achieve absolute enzymatic activity. This is essential to achieve absolute enzymatic activity. So increase in the concentration is also equal to the increase in the reaction rate. Okay? And examples of coenzymes are your nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide and your nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. Okay? So these are examples of your coenzymes. Your NAD and your NADP. Next, another example of your cofactor is your activators. And activators are inorganic ions. They are inorganic ions. Ano naman ang ginagawa nila? The activators here, they alter the spatial configuration of the enzyme. So they alter the structure of the enzyme. Bakit? So that there will be a proper binding between your substrate and your enzyme. Okay, between the substrate and your enzyme. So in here, examples of this are inorganic ions. No, so you have your calcium, what else? Zinc, chloride, potassium, magnesium. So, yung mga electrolytes natin yan, no? Those are our activators. So, next, we have your metalloenzymes. So, same with your inorganic ions. Same with your activators, inorganic ions din po sila. Okay, metalloenzymes and your activators are both inorganic ions. So, dito naman, sa metalloenzymes, they are attached to a molecule. So, si activators, they alter. Si metalloenzymes naman, they are attached to a molecule.
Recording stopped.
Class, naririnig pa rin ako? Can you still hear me? Clear pa rin naman. Okay, sige.
Recording in progress.
So next now, before we proceed with the other factor, we will have your the enzyme theories. So for the enzyme theories, we have two here, the lock and key theory and your induced fit theory. So for the lock and key theory, the shape of the key, which is your substrate, must fit into the lock, which is your enzyme. So tama yung sinabi kanina, I mean yung sagot kanina ni Castillo, Benedict, tama ba? You are telling me earlier about the substrate as parang susi. Sabi mo parang key po siya. So parang ipapasok natin siya doon sa ating lock, which is the enzyme. So yan yung unang theory natin, your lock and key. And then yung second theory natin is the induced fit theory. So let's discuss first your lock and key model. So yung lock and key model natin, wait lang. In our lock and key model here, it assumed that the active site is rigid. This is our active site, right? So it assumed here, or it is assumed here, that the active site is rigid, no? And it has the same conformation as that of the substrate. So kumbaga, or there comes a time na may substrate na sakto para sa kanya, no? So the amino acids that are present here are of that in your substrate. Okay? That in your substrate. Am I still choppy? Putol-putol? Konti? Nag-unstable ata tayo. So you have here, unstable ata yung connection ko. Ayan, how about this? Am I clear now? Clear? Clear na? Okay. So you have here Again, for the lock and key model, you have here the active site is rigid, having the same conformation as that of the substrate. So in here, you will see na sakto sila, no? Sakto. And that the enzyme here, the shape of the active site is, kumbaga, kasya doon sa ating substrate. So you have now here the ES complex. And nga lang, question arises nung merong may nakitang mga enzymes na merong intermediate form or kumbaga nagkaroon ng transition state of the substrate. So, nagkaroon ng another theory which is your induced fit theory. And this was introduced because of the drawbacks of the lock and key model. Kasi the lock and key model failed to explain the phenomena. So nagkaroon ng ganitong another theory, your induced fit model. So it was proposed, no? So according to this model here, the active site of the enzyme is not rigid. So hindi siya rigid with the same conformation as that of the substrate. And in here, it states here in your induced fit theory that the active site is flexible. Flexible siya and it can have different conformation. So yun yung pinagkaiba ng lock and key theory natin and induced fit theory. In the model here, they are stating na rigid ang conformation ng ating active site and that is only for this certain substrate here. So sila lang ang magbabind kasi hindi ito mag-a-adjust na shape ng active site natin. While in your induced fit theory, it states that enzymes are flexible, no? So kaya nilang mag-adjust. Kasi gusto kong mag-bind kami. So magbabind kami and mag-a-adjust ako ng shape ko. So in here, what happens here is that the conformation or the changes in the conformation will happen once na nag-bind na si substrate. No? Once na nag-bind na si substrate doon sa enzyme. So yung conformation of the active site gradually changes and it will now attain the conformation of that substrate molecule. So, ganun ang nangyayari sa induced fit, no? Dito kasi, kung sino lang yung the same ang conformation, kumbaga yung shape, ito lang yung sa akin. Dito naman, kaya niyang mag-adjust. So, hindi naman nila kino-contradict yung isa't isa, no? Meron tayong mga enzymes na lock and key, meron din yung iba na induced fit. No, induced fit enzymes. So, sige nga, sino yung mas maganda sa tingin ninyo? Well, actually, wala namang comparison dapat, no? Kasi nga, meron tayong mga enzymes that are lock and key and meron ding induced fit. So, there are enzymes na kaya mag-adjust, no? Sana all nag-a-adjust. Kasi gusto mo. So, gusto mo, mag-adjust ka. Ganon, no? So, kayang mag-adjust mo pa sa akin ka lamang. So, question here. Si lock and key po, fix. Yes. Oo. Somewhat like that, no? Fix sila. And yung induced fit, nag-a-adapt sila. Or they can change their conformation. So, depende dun sa substrate. But they change their conformation once the substrate is already with them or nag-bind na. Okay? So, yung iba gusto si induced fit kasi kayang mag-adjust, flexible, and can have different conformation. Yung iba naman gusto si lock and key kasi loyal daw. Okay? So, those are the two enzyme theories. So, next now, we have now here another factor affecting the enzymatic reaction. And that is called your inhibitors. So, unlike with your cofactor earlier, they are needed to help in the enzymatic reaction to occur. Now, in here, in your inhibitor, these are not needed Tama. Hindi natin sila kailangan because the enzymatic reactions may not progress if an inhibitor interferes with the reaction. So, hindi natin to gusto, no? Ayaw natin ng mga inhibitors. So, the usual reaction here is you have your ES complex, right? You have your substrate and you have your enzyme. The substrate is attached in the active site. No, ES complex yan. Now, with the presence of the inhibitors, hindi ganito ang nangyayari. Hindi nakakapag-bind si substrate sa active site ng enzyme because of these inhibitors. And we have here competitive inhibitor, non-competitive inhibitor, and uncompetitive inhibitor. So first is your competitive inhibitor. Your competitive inhibitor here is an inhibitor that binds to the active site of an enzyme. So as you can see here, you have your enzyme, you have here the active site. Yung competitive inhibitor natin doon dumikit sa active site. 'Di ba? Nanguha siya ng hindi sa kanya. So yung substrate natin dito na dapat ay sa kanya yan, kinuhaan na niya ng pwesto. So therefore, the substrate here can no longer bind with the active site of the enzyme kasi nga nandito na siya, kinuha na ng ating inhibitor. No? So yung ating substrate dito, hindi na siya makapag-bind dito sa active site because kinuha na siya ng competitive inhibitor. Okay? So in here, both your substrate and the inhibitor competes for the same active site. Nag-aagawan sila sa active site na yun. Okay? And the reaction here is considered as, what do you think? Reversible or irreversible? Itong pangyayaring ito, no? Itong type ng inhibition, this competitive inhibition, is this reversible or irreversible inhibition? Yes, Scarlon, Jaden?
Reversible po.
Why reversible?
Pag dumamit po yung concentration ng substrate, pwede po matalo yung yung inhibitor po.
Okay, very good. So for this type of inhibition, this is considered as reversible. Okay? Meaning, pwede pa rin itong matanggal si competitive inhibitor. How? Kaya natin yang matanggal if we will be increasing the concentration of the substrate. So, tama yung sinabi ni Scarlett, no? We have to increase the concentration of the substrate in order for us na matanggal si inhibitor, no? Because if the substrate is higher than the concentration of the inhibitor, more likely the inhibitor will be, kumbaga, matatanggal siya, and the substrate will now bind to the active site. And don't worry, kasi ang enzyme dito hindi nasisira, no? The enzyme will not be destroyed. You just have to increase the concentration of the substrate. At para sa kanya, ay mapupunta sa kanya, no? So, tatanggalin niya to. Okay? So, that is for the competitive inhibitor, no? Yung ating mga agaw dito ay talagang harap-harapan. Doon talaga siya didikit sa ating active site. Next dito ay yung non-competitive. So kung si competitive harap-harapan na dumidikit doon sa active site, for the non-competitive here, it does not compete with the substrate. Ayaw niya makipag-compete. Rather, your non-competitive inhibitor here binds an enzyme at a place other than the active site. So ayaw niya ng kompetensya. Ang ginagawa ng non-competitive, patago siyang didikit, no? It looks for areas other than the active site. So here in your non-competitive inhibitor, the substrate and the inhibitor can actually bind simultaneously. Pwede silang sabay. No? You have your non-competitive here and you have your substrate here. Nakita? So for this type of inhibition, ano kaya siya? What do you think? Is this type of inhibition reversible or irreversible? Reversible or irreversible? This is what? Yes, Christian.
Irreversible po, ma'am.
Very good. This is irreversible. No? Why irreversible?
Kasi po, na-alter na po yung active site by the binding of the non-competitive inhibitor po.
Na-alter yung active site by the binding of the non-competitive. Your non-competitive inhibitor here do not bind with your active site.
I mean, ma'am, by the, yung pag-bind po ng non-competitive inhibitor sa allosteric site, it likes, alters the shape or the active site po nung enzyme, kaya hindi na po makapag-bind si substrate.
Okay. So in here, sa allosteric site, so very good, no? So si non-competitive inhibitor, na-alter niya. So yung, di ba nag-bind siya sa allosteric site natin? So nagkakaroon ng alterations here in the active site. So hindi na makapag-bind yung substrate natin. But again, hindi sila nagko-compete sa active site, no? And the inhibition here is irreversible. It can be irreversible because the inhibitor binds the enzyme independently from the substrate. Magkaiba sila, no? So kahit i-increase natin yung concentration ng substrate dito, wala nang magkakaroon ng binding kasi na-alter na, right? So in here, no products will be formed. Same here with the competitive inhibitor, no? No products will be formed unless mapaalis natin yung competitive inhibitor at mailipat dyan si substrate. So there will be an ES complex. Dito, no products will be formed. So patago lang siya, no? Pero irreversible ang kanyang inhibition. Right? So anong mas maganda? Si competitive or si non-competitive? Wala po, ma'am. Ayaw po namin ng mga agaw. So wala. Yes, actually, wala naman talaga, diba? Supposedly, mas magandang wala para may reaction. Okay, but between these two, may chance ka, no, for the competitive inhibitor na mapatanggal by just increasing the substrate concentration. Okay, and last here is your uncompetitive inhibitor. Uncompetitive inhibitor, eto, kung meron tayo ditong makapal ang guts, no, na makipag-agawan, eto namang si irreversible ay patago. Si uncompetitive naman ay yung clingy. No? So, saan siya nagbabind? Sa mismong ES complex. You have your enzyme, you have your substrate. Dito talaga siya didikit. So, meron na kayo ditong ESI or your enzyme substrate inhibitor complex. So, tatlo na sila dyan. No? Uncompetitive inhibitor here, the inhibitor binds to the ES complex. So in here, wala din tayong products, no? It does not yield product. Increasing the substrate concentration will only result in more ES complexes. And the more na madami ES complex natin, madami ding magbabind na inhibitor, no? So mai-increase din yung inhibition natin. So if we have an enzyme substrate inhibitor complex, walang product na mabibigay din yan. Okay, so these are the three types of inhibitors: your competitive, your non-competitive, and your uncompetitive inhibitor. Next now is your temperature. So for the reactions or enzymatic reactions to occur, meron po tayong certain temperature na i-follow, no? So the higher or the increase in the temperature is equal to the increase in the rate of chemical reaction. So ganun yung nangyayari, no? Pag tumataas yung tumataas yung chemical reaction. But you have to be diligent ba ang term natin when you are increasing your temperature, because pag sobra-sobra din, it could result to the denaturation of proteins. So the optimum temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. So later sa midterms natin, sa lab activities natin, isa-set natin na 37 degrees Celsius. That is our optimum temp. But the active temperatures are 25, 30, as well as the 37. So pwede yung mga yan gamitin natin, no? And when we increase the temperature, mag-i-increase yung rate of chemical reactions. But careful lang kayo kasi pagka umabot yan ng 40 to 50 degrees Celsius, it could result to denaturation of proteins. So denatured na yung proteins natin dito. So wag nating paabutin ng ganyan, no? Kasi na yun na yung mga risky natin, no? If we increase our temperature to 40 to 50 degrees Celsius, no? And also take note here that for every 10 degrees Celsius increase in the temperature, there will be a twofold increase in the enzyme activity. Twofold increase in the enzyme activity. And this is called as your temperature coefficient 10. Temperature coefficient 10 or your Q10. Your Q10. So for every 10 degrees Celsius increase, there will be a twofold increase in the enzyme activity. So what else? Enzymes can also be inactivated. So paano natin to inactivate? By storing them in low temperatures. So they will be reversibly inactive. So yung mga serum or plasma specimen natin for the enzyme measurement, they are being stored in the refrigerator or sa freezer. So para ma-prevent yung ating loss of activity until such time na i-analyze na natin. So yun nga lang, bawal din yung if-freeze natin and then ito if-freeze na naman and then ito na naman. So sana, as much as possible, kapag na-freeze natin and then pag tinunaw natin or na-thaw na natin, i-test na natin. At hindi na uulitin na naman, no? Kasi repeated freezing and thawing can result to denatured protein. And again, enzymes are proteins, so they should be avoided kasi mapapangit na yung results natin. So we can store them at negative 60 to negative 65 degrees Celsius, no? That is for the temperature. So next now, we have the hydrogen ion concentration or the pH. So most physiologic reactions occur in the pH range of 7 to 8. So tatandaan din natin to because the pH can also denature the enzymes or pwede ding ma-influence nito yung ionic state natin. So sa laboratories, midterms, we will have the enzyme determination. Usually, sineset natin at 7 yung pH. I mean, yun yung ginagamit natin, no? So, kasi yun yung pH where most of the reactions will occur, mga enzymatic reactions. Next, for the storage, again, negative 20 degrees Celsius. So this is your ref temp, no? Preservation for longer period of time. 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, ideal for substrate and coenzymes. Room temp for LDH storage. So LD4 and LD5. So next, you have your hemolysis here and your milky specimen. For the hemolyzed sample, what do you think will be the result of your enzyme concentration? Is it falsely increased or falsely decreased? Yes, Shigozia. Is it increase or decrease? Okay. Okay lang kung walang mic. So, he answered falsely increase. Why? Hmm? Bakit? Because, very good, Adrian. Because, very good, Sophia Marie. Because there is cellular destruction. 'Di ba? Pagka hemolyze, rupture yung RBCs natin. So, there will be an increase in the enzymes. So, kapag ka-hemolyze ang sample natin and you have an enzyme determination or enzyme assay, you have to reject the specimen because it will result to falsely increased values. Next, you have your milky specimen. So, dito naman decrease ang enzyme concentration. Concentration. So, next now, we're done with the introduction on the factors affecting the enzymatic reactions. Next, now we have the classification of enzymes. So far we have 6 classifications. You have your oxidoreductase, your transferases, transferases, hydrolases, liases, isomerases, and ligases. So these are the 6 classification of enzymes. By the way, for the names of the enzymes, they usually ends with what? What is our suffix here for enzymes? Very good. ASE. ASE. So yung mga names ng enzymes natin, they end with ASE. So first, you have here your oxidoreductases. Your oxidoreductases catalyzes an oxidation reduction reaction between two substrates. Between two substrates. And examples of oxidoreductases are your lactate dehydrogenase, your G6PD or glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase, GLD or your glutamate dehydrogenase. Next, transferases. So for the transferases here, they catalyze the transfer of a group other than the hydrogen from one substrate to another. An example of transferases are, you have your AST and your ALT. You still remember these two? These are part of what? Tests. Part of what test? Liver function. So very good, naaalala pa sa CC1 natin, no? Liver function test. You have your AST and your ALT. So these are transferases. Your AST, that is your aspartate aminotransferase, and your ALT, that is your ALT, alanine aminotransferase. Sorry na, matagal bang mahirap mag-type. Sige. Pero naaalala. So very good, alanine aminotransferase. AST, this is formerly known as your SGOT, and your ALT is your SGPT. SGPT. So AST, you have your GST here, glutathione S-transferase. You have your glycogen phosphorylase, creatine kinase, pyruvate kinase, and your gamma-glutamyl transferase. For the hydrolases, it catalyzes hydrolysis of various bonds. So you have here your alkaline phosphatase, your chymotrypsin, your lipase, your acid phosphatase, your elastase 1, amylase, or alpha amylase, it can be, And then you have your NTP or your nucleotidase. And then you have your um, cholinesterase and your trypsin. For delayases, you have your ALD or dealdolase, and it catalyzes the removal of groups from substrates without hydrolysis. So the product contains double bonds. Next, you have your isomerases, and it catalyzes the interconversion of geometric, optical, or positional isomers. So you have your TPI here, triose phosphate isomerase. And last, for the classification, you have your ligase or ligases. It catalyzes the joining of two substrate molecules coupled with breaking of the pyrophosphate bond in adenosine triphosphate or a similar compound. An example of this is your GSHS or your glutathione synthetase. Okay, so you have to take note of this classification of enzymes and the examples. And class, we have a lot of enzymes. What we will be discussing here in our lecture will be the enzymes of clinical significance. So madami po yung mga yan, pero yung mga didiscuss natin is yung mga usually na tinetest natin in the laboratory. So I have your summary table of the classification of enzymes. And this is directly lifted from